Welcome to the studio. I'm Katerina Nestorenko. Today, here's what we're talking about. Russia is expanding, rearming, and preparing to attack Europe by 2030. Ukraine has once again struck the Druzhba oil pipeline with drones, a fire show in the Krasnodar region, with the Ilsky refinery under attack. The occupiers have launched an offensive in the Dnipropetrovsk region against the AFU. There is a counterattack in the Dobropillia area. There's no gasoline, but hang in there in Tatarstan. Locals can't refuel their cars. Russia is forcibly teaching Ukrainian children to fight in the occupied territories. 20,000 EU servicemen may appear in Ukraine even before the fighting ends. All this and more in just a few seconds. But right now, please like this video and subscribe to the channel Ukraine Today so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's get started. Russia is preparing for a large-scale rearmament and could attack Europe by 2030. The Kremlin is launching its largest rearmament program since the 1980s, with a budget estimated at $1.2 trillion. This was stated in an interview with Apostrov by the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Budanov.
Essentially, this is the rearmament of the Russian Federation for the period up to 2037. The most intensive phase is planned until 2030. This is the largest program since the 1980s, not even during the final years of the Soviet Union. Currently, the estimated amount is about 1.2 trillion allocated solely for rearmament. This is not the Ministry of Defense's budget. These are strictly funds for the modernization and rearmament program. These are serious programs and significant funds.
Importantly, Budanov emphasized that even Putin's death would not stop the implementation of this program.
This particular factor will not have any impact on it.
According to him, the modernization of the army is directly linked to the Kremlin's plans to launch a full-scale aggression against Europe closer to 2030.
Not now, but closer to 2030. This is an absolute reality. This is connected to the modernization of the Russian army. It is tied to their plans and ambitions. In other words, they are planning and will continue to prepare. In other words, they are planning a strike against NATO countries, against European Union countries, against Europe.
The head of the GUR also recalled that Russia had already conducted a partial mobilization in 2022, but it may return to this practice to compensate for losses at the front.
Meanwhile, in a related development, significant progress has been made on the ongoing project, leading to promising outcomes and further advancements.
While the Kremlin accelerates rearmament, prepares for a new wave of mobilization, and does not hide its ambitions beyond Ukraine, the Republic of Bashkortostan marks a peculiar anniversary. About 7,000 residents have died in Putin's war. This republic is the leader in the number of deaths in the so-called special military operation. Given the geometric progression of rising losses, by 2026, the number of deaths could reach 12,000 residents. Right now, all the details are in our report.
How many more must die in a war that is not ours? This is the question posed by the Committee of the Bashkir National Movement abroad, as they publish grim statistics for their compatriots. 7,000 residents of the Republic of Bashkortostan have died in the war with Ukraine. The average age of the deceased has increased to 40 years. Official figures significantly downplay this number, stating that 4,000 have died.
The Kremlin really doesn't like being directly confronted with the harsh reality of the situation. The reality is that the poorest segments of the population are the most actively involved, primarily because this is a war. It's a story where people are offered money to go and die, as we say, which is why it's very disadvantageous for the Kremlin if Russians understand the true number of casualties, the real proportions, that people are being taken to war most actively from, on one hand, among former prisoners, and on the other, from the poorest regions.
The highest number of deaths was recorded in the winter of 2024-2025, just over 900. They are from Rodoma, not from Ufa, but from the Solovatsky, Sterlitamaksky, and Beloretsky districts.
Ufa, of course, is the capital, so the gap between living standards there is the largest, meaning there are both very poor people and relatively wealthy people. As for the other districts, as is usually the case in Russia, the poorest people live either in areas with a predominantly rural population or in regions where industrial production is in decline. And in fact, the districts of Bashkiria that were mentioned are exactly like that, which is precisely why so many of the deceased come from there.
12% of those killed had spent less than a month in the combat zone. Losses among the rank and file amount to 2,623 people, and 246 officers have also been killed.
Today, the laws inside Russia are such that even though there are still a noticeable number of people who oppose the war, they have practically been deprived of their voice, because for any half-spoken word or even a sideways glance or a comment on social media, you can end up serving a pretty serious prison sentence. That's why the loudest voices are still those of people who have already left their homeland. And of course, among them are residents of Bashkortostan. As far as I remember, there is the organization Free Bashkortostan. And there is also the fairly well-known Bashkir, Rostislav Kmursagolov, and all of them are speaking out quite loudly.
As a result, about 2,000 families from Bashkortostan have been left without husbands, fathers, or sons, and if you take into account the wounded and missing, this number could be even higher.
There are, unfortunately, families that have hit rock bottom, where, in fact, the trade in husbands and sons, I wouldn't say it's become a full-blown industry, but it is thriving. And in this sense, I wouldn't even compare it to the treatment of livestock by the population, because even animals treat their offspring better.
According to open data as of December 2024, Bashkortostan is the absolute leader in the number of people killed in the war in Ukraine. Together with Tatarstan, they outpace other regions in the rate of loss growth. Bashkortostan's participation in Russia's war against Ukraine is having a negative impact on the region's demographics, economy, and social situation.
Druzhba has cracked again. The Ukrainian armed forces have once again attacked a Russian oil pipeline. This concerns the linear production dispatch station of the Druzhba oil pipeline in the Bryansk region. The successful strike on the facility was carried out by the UAV forces of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The LVDS-8N is part of the main pipeline complex Steel Horse, which has a pumping capacity of 10.5 million tons. The facility is of strategic importance for transporting petroleum products to the Russian occupation army. Numerous hits have been recorded, followed by fires breaking out in the area of the pumping station and the tank farm.
It was a hot night not only in Bryansk People's Republic. Ukrainian drones also put on a fire show in Krasnodar Krai. The Ilsky oil refinery was also hit. Kursk region was affected as well, with successful strikes on the locations of occupying personnel and the logistics warehouses of Russian troops. And now, let's talk about the situation at the front. Deep state analysts report that the Russians have launched an offensive in the direction of Dnipropetrovsk.
The enemy has advanced near Ternovoy, Yanvarsky, Sosnovka, Vzverov, and Voron.
However, the increased enemy activity was known in advance, so their advance was not a surprise, unlike the successes in the Suvrayon of Dobropillia. We have always believed in the strength of our defense, but for the Russians, the counteroffensive by our troops came as a real surprise. Over the past month, Ukrainian fighters, particularly from the 1st Separate Assault Regiment, have liberated 6 settlements near Dobropillia. The military showed exactly how they did it. They managed to eliminate the enemy's pincers in this area. Nevertheless, despite the successes of the Ukrainian forces, the Russians are not giving up their attempts to capture the Donetsk region. We've already talked more than once about the Russians' dream of taking Pokrovsk, and now there is new evidence to support it. It is reported that the enemy has deployed significant forces of equipment and personnel in the Kostiantynivka-Pokrovsk direction to prepare for an offensive. The Air Assault Forces Corps of the Armed Forces of Ukraine clarify this. We are talking about professional units of the Marine Infantry. The enemy's key objective is to capture the Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk agglomeration.
The main goal of the enemy in Pokrovsk is to get as close as possible to the positions of drone operators or mortar crews. They are trying to disperse our defensive forces, gain a foothold in new positions, and also expand the boundaries of the grey zone. At the same time, on the flanks, the enemy launched assault operations using armored vehicles and motorized equipment, trying to cut off the logistical routes of the 7th Corps and encircle the Pokrovsk agglomeration. According to available information, Russia plans to use its grouping in the Donetsk region for a so-called decisive breakthrough. With the use of a large number of personnel and equipment, the enemy's key objective remains unchanged: to capture the Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk, and Sloviansk agglomeration.
So far, our defenders have managed to hold back and destroy the enemy. For example, the pilots of the Phoenix border unit executed a precise strike on a target, destroying a tank, an APC, and a truck loaded with Russians. And this same Phoenix unit destroyed a Russian Uragan. There are also successes in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Ukrainian fighters managed to attack the rear of the Russian occupiers and strike an enemy command post. Let's thank the Ukrainian army. They are holding the front and accomplishing the impossible under incredibly difficult conditions. Meanwhile, the situation is, as they say, appropriate. Scarcity is rapidly returning us to the Soviet Union.
No, not at all. I drove around to 5 gas stations. I thought I would have to walk on foot already. But I finally found some 95-octane gas at the city exit, right across from the traffic police. That's it, this is a disaster. I don't know what to do anymore. But there's no 92 octane at all. You don't even need to look for 92. At some gas stations, it's only available with coupons. What is this anyway? What is this, the Soviet Union?
Back to the crisis of the 90s, fuel shortages are finishing off Russian steelworkers. The strategic industrial sector of the aggressor country is dying. Even the leaders themselves are no longer hiding it. A colossal drop in production and exports. Hundreds of thousands of steelworkers are losing their jobs, dooming their families to poverty. It'll be like the hungry 90s. And all because of the war Putin started in Ukraine.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Russia is sinking into a new industrial crisis.
What are we supposed to do with it? They don't know. They're going to ask for help now. Help circumstances magni.ru. And
While the bunker dweller keeps broadcasting that everything is going according to plan, Russian metallurgy is facing a powerful blow. Falling demand, closed export markets, and expensive loans threaten a complete shutdown of some factories. Alexander Shevelev, CEO of Sevastal, which accounts for 14% of all steel production in Russia, warns. The industry is returning to a crisis on the scale of the 1990s when metallurgy experienced real devastation. If the situation does not change, the consequences could be catastrophic for the entire industry.
A financial deficit could, in the long term, turn industrial enterprises into piles of rusty metal. Metallurgists have faced a sharp drop in demand, and the greatest risk posed by the current crisis is a complete halt in development.
And with each passing day, the situation becomes increasingly alarming. According to Rustat, in July, metal production volumes fell by 10.2% compared to last year, marking the largest decline since the start of the war. And this is almost twice as steep as the drop in the first months of the invasion of Ukraine, -6% in June 2022. Since the end of 2024, the industry has been in decline, dropping by 1.5%, and by the summer of 2025, the downturn had accelerated nearly threefold.
Metal consumption in Russia is falling at double-digit rates amid a cooling economy, primarily in construction and mechanical engineering. The end of the war could also pose a risk for metallurgists, since in that case, metal consumption in the defense industry would begin to decline.
Key enterprises are feeling the impact most acutely. The Magnitogorsk plant, one of the largest in Europe and the second largest in Russia, reported an 18% drop in steel production and a 9% decrease in pig iron output for the second quarter. Mekol reduced its steel sales by 11%. TMK saw an 18% drop in steel pipes and nearly 22% in seamless pipes. In the first 6 months, TMK incurred a loss of $3.2 billion rubles. Mekol lost more than 40 billion. MMK and Sevastal recorded negative cash flows of 4.8 billion and 29.1 billion rubles, respectively.
In reality, the problem is being experienced by the Russian Federation's economy. And it's just that when we talk about most strategic enterprises, it's more obvious. Why? Because all major Russian companies, metallurgy, oil and gas extraction, and many others have generally been export-oriented. The problems themselves are related to selling products on foreign markets, because they were the first to feel, in fact, all these troubles associated with you. On the other hand, the domestic market of the Russian Federation is also, generally speaking, shrinking. It is shrinking largely because money is needed for the war, and since money is needed for the war, a whole range of programs, including investment programs that were previously funded by the state, are being cut. Well, for example, so-called cheap mortgages and many other things. As a result, for instance, the demand for metallurgical products from the construction sector is falling.
And then a complete chain reaction occurs.
Demand is lower because people are buying less. And on the other hand, we've built a lot of housing that we can't sell. Naturally, new construction programs are being frozen or postponed for the future. And this means a decrease in demand, let's say, for the same metallurgical products. Well, and so you could say it's a chain reaction.
Exports have also stopped saving the industry. Last year, only 20 million tons of steel were sold abroad, a third less than before the war. But these volumes are now becoming unprofitable. The sharp rise in the ruble exchange rate is killing profits for the metal industry as well. According to experts, it is practically impossible to export profitably.
In the economy, when problems accumulate, they don't resolve themselves. Usually the solution to problems is some kind of reset, whether big or small.
Once the locomotive of the Russian economy, metallurgy is turning into a sector with negative dynamics and growing debts. If the situation does not change, tens of thousands of jobs and with them entire factory towns risk being pushed to the brink of extinction. Russia is returning to a reality where metal is no longer a pillar but a symbol of crisis. And this crisis is beginning to consume the entire system of the terrorist state.
British intelligence reports that Kremlin organizations such as Rearming and the Movement of the First are forcibly teaching our Ukrainian children in the occupied territories to fight and are actively feeding them anti-Ukrainian propaganda. This is part of Moscow's systematic policy to raise a younger generation loyal to the Kremlin regime. Since 2002, the aggressor country has been implementing the University Sessions program. Children from the occupied regions of Ukraine are sent to Russian universities, where they are indoctrinated with an anti-Ukrainian worldview and taught to glorify the so-called exploits of the Russian Federation. According to British intelligence, since the start of this program, 50,000 Ukrainian children have gone through such sessions. And in the temporarily occupied Luhansk region, the occupiers have already organized training for children as snipers. Share your opinion in the comments about such actions by the aggressor. I know that we have a lot of viewers in Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, the USA and Europe. And we are very grateful to you for your support. In Russia, the hunt for so-called silent ones continues unabated. After Valery Meladze, propagandist media have now targeted Kristina Orbakaite, a singer who has remained silent since before the war, once again accusing her of secretly supporting Ukraine. You might ask how, well, it's for participating in the annual Sounds of the Sea festival in Ashdod, Israel, scheduled for September 18th. Kremlin mouthpieces are already throwing a fit, claiming that the festival's name is in the colors of the Ukrainian flag and that the organizer, Boris Belodubrovsky, is a staunch opponent of the war and, on top of that, a friend of Orbakaite. Remember how Pugacheva's daughter, at the start of the invasion, posted a black square on Instagram with a short caption, "Only peaceful skies, no to war"? But then she quickly deleted that post, later saying that her family found all these events distressing. And now her neutrality is once again irritating the Kremlin hawks. Well, Kristina, hang in there. Even outside the borders of the motherland, staying silent is dangerous too. What do you think? Is this just harassment or something more serious? Although, to be fair, she is playing on Ukraine's side. Share your thoughts in the comments. While Ukrainian soldiers are holding the line under extremely tough conditions, Putin is betting that the front in Ukraine will collapse faster than his own economy. The publication Wall Street Journal writes, "The man in the bunker has put almost all his cards on this scenario. It is precisely because of this self-confidence and the belief that time is on Russia's side that Putin is avoiding negotiations. And although this is already obvious to everyone, even to the Kremlin's friend Donald Trump, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico insists that Putin is supposedly interested in meeting with Zelensky. Moreover, according to Fico, the Russian dictator is even ready to make concessions and meet somewhere other than Moscow."
During the meeting, Putin stated that he was ready to meet with Zelensky anywhere, although Fico admits that this meeting would not bring much political benefit because Russians would not appreciate Putin for it.
And while some people still believe in Russian fairy tales and even retell them, Europe is actively working on security guarantees for Ukraine. Earlier, we reported that according to Vosti Journal, the EU has developed a plan to deploy 2 land-based groups of foreign military personnel in Ukraine.
The plan includes 2 groups of ground forces. One group is for training and assisting Ukrainian troops, and the other, separate support forces to prevent a future Russian invasion. The current plan already requires sending more than 10,000 military personnel. Air patrols of the skies would be carried out by air forces based outside of Ukraine.
But it seems that foreign media are downplaying the scale. According to sources in the Verkhovna Rada, the contingent could number at least 20,000 troops and may appear in Ukraine even before the war ends.
The coalition's military contingent may already be stationed in Ukraine. No one is talking about the war ending. Currently, there are already up to 1,000 foreign military personnel in Ukraine. The contingent should be at least 20,000 people. At its maximum, it could reach 50,000 people. France plans to send the largest number of troops, followed by Denmark in second place, the Netherlands in third, and the United Kingdom in fourth.
President Zelensky also hints that Europe may begin guaranteeing Ukraine's security sooner. According to him, the force that will put pressure on Russia, on land, in the air, and at sea, is already being prepared.
There are 26 countries providing security guarantees for Ukraine. And these are substantial measures on land, in the air, at sea, as well as in cyberspace, and this also includes funding for our army. Most importantly, Ukraine must have a strong enough army to ensure our independence and sovereignty are truly guaranteed. That means weapons for the army and long-term funding for the Ukrainian military. Many of these components we have agreed upon with our partners as a foundation.
And
How do you assess the chances of deploying a foreign contingent in Ukraine? When could this happen? And in your opinion, what number of troops are we talking about, or could we be talking about? Chinese television forced Reuters to delete the video where Putin and Xi Jinping dream of immortality, since the Chinese state channel owns the rights to the video itself and its distribution. But dear internet censors, Tanya is asleep and remembers everything. The video has already spread faster than lightning. China also banned its citizens from searching for information about living to 150 years old after their leader's conversation with the Russian dictator. This refers to a moment that was broadcast live during the parade in Beijing. A microphone caught Xi saying, "At 70, you're still a child." And Putin added, "Biotechnology will grant immortality. Organs can be replaced endlessly." Somewhere in the frame, Kim Jong-un also appears, and there you have three dreamers of eternal life. Basically, the Chinese wanted to erase this, but only fueled more interest. Seriously? In 2025, hide something like this? Write in the comments what you think about this. That's all for now. Give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time.